Welcome to the Peter King Podcast, a mid to late October edition of the podcast in which we dissect a lot about what's going on around the National Football League. For this podcast, we are going to steer clear of all things Gruden and all things emails with the NFL. We're going to stick to stuff on the field from this week. And I think one of the things I'm going to get into heavily with Paul Burmeister, my friend from NBC, is exactly what happened to the balance of power in the AFC with the Monday night result of the sort of the stunning result of the Buffalo Bills, who many of us thought were the best team in football. Now, what do we think of the Buffalo Bills? So, later in the podcast, we're going to have my friend Seth Wickersham, author of It's Better to Be Feared, the complete story of the 20-year run of the New England Patriots that is coming out this fall, and I recommend it pretty highly, even for all of you who hate the Patriots. It's just a very, very well-reported, well-sourced book. So we'll get to Seth Wickersham after we dissect the news of the week in the National Football League. And Paul Burmeister, I'm going to start by basically saying that we get in trouble every week around this time of year with making things like power rankings or who the best team is. It could be that 2 weeks ago, we might have thought that the Los Angeles Chargers were the best team in football. And last week, we might have thought that the Buffalo Bills were the best team in football. And this week, maybe we think it's a team in the NFC. It's, because there's the Arizona Cardinals who are undefeated, and we'll get to them a little bit later. It could be almost any team, but it also could be the Baltimore Ravens, the lone remaining 5-1 team in the AFC. I think my lesson here, and what I would like to put out, is essentially that it really is not that important on October 20, 21, 22, what team you think is the best team in football. It matters who it is on February 15th. I mean, a year ago, no one would have thought that, even though Tampa Bay had Brady, they were really struggling to put together any sort of consistency. They went to Chicago in October and lost a very ugly game to the Bears. So I guess, in the immortal words of that American statesman, Aaron Rodgers, I would just like to say to everybody, RELAX, because I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be there the first week of February and late in January.
So, Peter, are you saying all these mock drafts that we do in March don't matter? That all these lists that we create for conversation purpose, we do it throughout the spring, summer, and also in the fall? I mean, I'm with you. I totally agree. It's an easy, fun way on one hand to create conversation and also some debate, which a lot of people love at this time of year. But I'm with you. I think it's nice to remove emotion, to not get too caught up in rankings and just kind of trust what you see, especially when we get to this point of the season where there is a decent sample size. So 6 games in with the new schedule, we're a little over a third of the way through the season. I think teams are starting to become who they are. So if you want to remove the 4-2 or the 3-3 or the 5-1 and just trust what you see with your eyes and ignore whatever list that the conversation may demand on Monday or Tuesday, I do think it's a very good way of going about it.
In watching a chunk of that game, and I have to be honest here, I watch more of the baseball game on Monday night than the football game because there's really only one team I pull for in sports, and that's the Red Sox. So now as half the audience throws the smartphone or whatever you're listening to this podcast on out the window, I'll just say that, to me, the Buffalo Bills did not play a bad game. And look, there's a lot of reasons why you win and lose a game. But honestly, it reminds me of the Ice Bowl a little bit when Jerry Kramer just said, hey, listen, I need to find a little piece of ice here, a little patch that I can carve up and get a good push off of so I can create a little hole for Bart Starr to come through behind me. And that's exactly what he did, and that's how one of the most famous football games of all time was won. You wonder what happens in that game and what happens on that play if Josh Allen doesn't slip. And if he actually has good footing coming off to try to make that sneak. And really, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter very much. Tennessee wins the game. But the one other thing I would say to people saying, well, Buffalo fell to earth, I would also say this. Look at some of the games over the years that Tennessee has won at home, especially later in the year. They've had some huge wins in Nashville against very good teams. So last night, to me, told me more about Tennessee and Tennessee's ability to play good, sort of competent, especially offensive football when they've got so many weapons back, because obviously they had their two receivers back for the first time in a while, and they've got Derrick Henry and a very efficient quarterback in Ryan Tannehill. Now you have to worry about, look, they might really, with the problems they're having in the secondary, Paul, they might have to outscore people the rest of the year. I still think they're the class of a weak AFC South, but once you start playoff time, if they're as beat up defensively as they are right now, they're going to have to score in the 30s every game to have a chance to win.
Peter, I thought the game was really telling about the top half of the AFC and kind of where we find that conference at this point of the season, a little bit more than halfway through October. If you start with the thought that to many people, in addition to Buffalo, in whatever order you had the top three teams in the AFC 2 months ago, Kansas City and Cleveland were likely on that list, somewhere on 1, 2, or 3. Neither one of those teams has a winning record at this point. And, kind of looking at that a little bit here last night and this morning, Peter, I zoomed out of the AFC and kind of found it's so much different than the NFC in the sense that over half of the teams are either 3-3 or 4-2, 9 to be exact. So you kind of have all these teams that are either decent or pretty good, or maybe they're really good. And it's going to be fun the next couple of months to see how that plays out. But that's where we are in the AFC. And we had two of those teams last night that are toward the top of that list. And I really felt like it was Tennessee. And I know it could have very easily been Buffalo. I mean, many could say that they should have won that game based off that last player or Josh Allen slipping. But I thought you had Tennessee kind of raising its hand and saying, we're still here. We're still one of the big boys. We should be considered on that list with Buffalo and the rest, however you may rank them. And you talk about big games they've won in Nashville. Next week, Kansas City comes to town. So it's a heck of a combo for the Titans to go Bills, Chiefs. But that'll be a really telling game about this large chunk of the AFC that is somewhere between, okay, you're competitive. Let's see if you're really good.
Let's move on to the team with the best record in football. For the last 2 weeks, the only unbeaten team in football has been the Arizona Cardinals. Now, everyone including me, viewed this as the ultimate landmine game when Arizona flew to Cincinnati on Saturday, or flew to Cleveland, excuse me. The reason why it was a landmine game is not because Arizona's a weak team. Arizona is clearly not a weak team. But the reason why it was a landmine game is that they've got no head coach, Cliff Kingsbury. Their quarterback coach is out. The starting center is out, Pro Bowl center Rodney Hudson. And, they're all missing in action. None of them get on that plane. And I thought what was really interesting, I talked to this guy who I never heard of before Sunday, Spencer Whipple. Now, Spencer Whipple is the assistant wide receivers coach for the Arizona Cardinals. And Cliff Kingsbury designated Spencer Whipple, a calm, cool, straight-line guy, 32 years old, as the coach on his staff who he was going to have call the plays into the helmet of Kyler Murray on Sunday. Tremendous responsibility for Spencer Whipple. And it just goes to show me that, Kyler Murray doesn't blink when something like that happens. The entire team doesn't blink. They go and beat Cleveland. And look, Cleveland is beat up too. They're in trouble. But they win on the road. I don't care if you're playing the Washington Generals. When you win by 23 on the road with everything against you that Arizona had, that shows me, Paul, that they are going to be a factor very deep into this season.
And the way they did it, Peter, showed me that they have a real formula for success offensively. And I know that was a massive change to have Cliff Kingsbury at home and to have Whipple calling the plays there. But if you look at what they did and the kind of plays that they ran to win by that much, it wasn't really any different than the previous 5 games. Kyler Murray is throwing the ball between 30 and 35 times a game. He's running a handful of times for really moderate production when you think about how elusive and how skilled he is in that area. If you took away the fact that you knew that the way the plays got called and the plan got executed from the sideline to the field on Sunday was much different than the previous 5 games, just the results and how it looked on the field was almost exactly the same. So this is a team, we talk about identity. They've got a real identity. And what impresses me the most, no matter who's calling the plays there in Arizona, is how you can say that Kyler Murray is the most improved quarterback in the NFL. And I think you can also say he's the most elusive quarterback in the NFL. And they're using him in moderation. I mean, he's not throwing it 50 times a game. He's not running it 20 times a game. He's not even running it 7 or 8 times a game. They're using his improvement and his talent in moderation and also leaning on the defense and a decent ground game. And it's an identity that, to me, at this point offensively, is really in all caps with some exclamation points after it, too.
You know, I'll say one more thing, and then we'll go to our last topic here. But what is so interesting to me is that Cliff Kingsbury, when he took this job, he said, listen, we are going to have one of the best running teams in football. And I'm saying to myself, this is a guy who basically has the reputation of being like a run and shoot offensive coach, that he wants to throw the ball 70% of the time. And we found out in that first year in 2019 that he was not kidding at all. You know, they ran for almost 2,000 yards. They ran for 5 yards a carry. And then again, last year, they run for 4.7. Now they're down this year. I was just looking at it today. They're down to 4.2. But what I like about it is Kyler Murray basically being less of a focus and sort of boosting, as Lamar Jackson does in Baltimore, boosting yards per carry. And instead, you know, you've got Chase Edmonds has become a real difference maker in the running game. He had a 54-yard run the other day in Cleveland. So look, I would agree with you. This is a team that can beat you a lot of different ways. And again, I was a little skeptical of how much J.J. Watt would have left. And again, it's only 6 games. But J.J. Watt showed me something on Sunday in Cleveland. I watched a lot of that game. And other guys, two of their other players, and I think Marcus Golden has been golden for them so far. But J.J. Watt was a big, big factor in that game. Golden and Hicks get 2 sacks apiece. But J.J. Watt showed that there's still a lot of tread on that tire. Paul, the last thing I really wanted to get your input on, and then we'll go to some quick hit things around the NFL. So I did something in my column on Monday this week in which I said, as of today, right now, here, in my opinion, are the quarterbacks who are playing the best in football right now. Here's my top 12 quarterbacks. And I put a list in there, and needless to say, I got quite a lot of feedback about it. And look, I'm just going to read the list right now. I'm just going to go 1 to 12. And then I'll give you one little edit, all right? Number 1, Kyler Murray. Number 2, Josh Allen. Number 3, Dak Prescott. Number 4, Lamar Jackson. Number 5, Tom Brady. Number 6, Aaron Rodgers. 7, Justin Herbert. 8, Patrick Mahomes. 9, Matthew Stafford. 10, Kirk Cousins. 11, Derek Carr. 12, Joe Burrow. And understand one thing. If I were picking a quarterback for the next 10 years, if you said to me, all right, give me a quarterback who you want to build your team around for the next 10 years, Patrick Mahomes, who's 8th on my list of how he's playing right now, would be number 1 for me. But I picked this list based on what exactly is happening right now. And I'll give you one last thing before I get your input. If I had to pick it after the Monday night game, I would have to find some way either to make it my top 13 or to wedge Ryan Tannehill in there somewhere, maybe right around Derek Carr, Joe Burrow range. But tell you, Ryan Tannehill, to me, terminally underrated player. And I think he showed on Monday night that in a battle with any great team, he is the equal. The bottom line in this is you can put these quarterbacks in any order, but I named 12 plus Ryan Tannehill, and I'm sure there are others who people would argue about. But I just named 12 quarterbacks. I mean, the reason why I did this is I wanted to make the point we are in the golden age of quarterbacks, the kind of age that we've never seen before, and I mean ever. Because on this list right now, I believe that by the end of this year, we will be looking at the 12th guy on this list, Joe Burrow, and saying he's every bit what Dan Fouts was to the San Diego Chargers. So I open the floor to you, Paul. Rip my list, praise my list, fix my list. What say you?
Maybe a little bit of all of the above. And Peter, I've got to admit, when I got your kind of outline and plan for what you wanted to talk about today, I lit up when I saw the top 12 quarterback list and your assignment to me, pick one argument to make with it. And I think it all comes down to the criteria that you talked about a lot. And I've got it written down here. How are they playing right now? That's what we're basing this off of. Not who you want in the next 2 months or 10 years, what they did last year, but what are they doing right now? And the one argument that I can come up with that I really have conviction about, because there are a number of them that you can fasten yourself to and make that argument. But the number one for me is the guy you have listed at number 8, and that's Patrick Mahomes. And if we're based off of what we think is going to happen, I wouldn't be making this argument. But the previous 6 games, I not only think he's not number 8, I would have him below Matt Stafford. I would have him below Kirk Cousins. And that was the tough one for me. I took a whole page and wrote down Patrick Mahomes and I wrote down Kirk Cousins. First of all, on your list of 12, they're the only 2 that are not the quarterback of a winning team. These are 3-3 teams. So it's really a pretty good comp. If you go back game by game and kind of how they're playing, I think you'd have to say that Kirk Cousins has had more to do with Minnesota's success than Patrick Mahomes has had to do with Kansas City. I know he's the main focus point of what they're doing, but I think Kirk is playing better right now through 6 games in that offense than what Mahomes is doing in his. I'll check back in 4 weeks and see how we feel at that point. But it all goes to kind of what your main thesis here, if you can have a thesis about just a fun little topic, that it's just these 6 games. I don't think Mahomes is in the top 10 right now based off of what he's done through mid-October.
Now that you mention it, if I was really being religious about this topic, I'd probably say you're absolutely right. I think the one thing about it, Paul, that kind of gives me pause is that I watched a lot of the Kansas City game on Sunday. And with the exception of one horrible interception he threw right before halftime. I mean, just pathetic, really. He really played a good game. He used his legs so well. And that's one thing that, clearly if we're talking about the all-around game of what a quarterback does, Mahomes is really asked to do a lot with his legs, and not just running the ball, but he's asked to do a lot with his legs to get out of danger, to get out of harm's way. And look, Paul, in the last 2 years total, Patrick Mahomes in 31 games, I think I'm right in saying 31 games, has thrown 11 interceptions. In 6 games this year, he's thrown 8. So he's kind of lost the benefit of the doubt, as you say. And a guy like Cousins, if you want to put him ahead of Mahomes, I'm really pretty good with that. Who is not on the list? Who, when you looked at it, you said, man, how do you leave off quarterback X?
Yeah, I had the same thought last night when watching the game that you just brought up, Peter. Ryan Tannehill. I mean, especially after last night, deserves a spot. Russell Wilson, I know he's hurt. He's going to be out for a little while. But, I mean, imagine how difficult this list would be to keep it to 12 if you had to throw in Tannehill and if Russell Wilson was healthy right now. So I think the name that comes to mind is Tannehill. And the interesting part about that, I mean, it's 2021, but if we were doing this in mid-October in 2020 or in 2019, we'd have to come back to this side note of, well, why isn't Ryan Tannehill on here? He is always the guy that the team is winning. He's playing a really nice role in it, and he doesn't show up on lists like that. So I would like to come up with somebody that you just didn't mention a couple moments ago. But if I'm being honest here, the one who deserves to be on the most, besides Russell Wilson, is Tannehill.
It was very interesting, the response I got to this. And, I had a couple of people who really were angry about specific quarterbacks, and which I really couldn't get angry about who they were angry about. But a couple of people wrote and said, with as bad as his team is and his weapons way down, you've got to have Matt Ryan on this list. And a couple of people even said, listen, the multiple ways that that Jalen Hurts plays, and I don't accept this at all, because I just don't think he's been accurate enough early on and shown enough accuracy. But look, if you did 15, which you easily could do, and you did include Russell Wilson, I should have made a note about that, I'm not putting Russell Wilson on now because he's hurt and all that. But if you were to expand the list to 16 or at least to 15, and you had Tannehill, Russell Wilson, and Matt Ryan on it, just think about that and think about comparing. You pick any one of those guys, and let's say you would pick Tannehill. If you took any one of those guys, and you then said, all right, and look, Tannehill's touchdown to interceptions are terrible this year because they've been running the ball to excess, but he really deserves to get some credit, and to be on this list. But it just shows the total golden age of quarterback that we're in right now. And Paul, I'll just ask you this. Is there a time, since you have been watching football, that you believe that the overall quality of quarterbacking was better than it is now? And if so, when would that be?
I think it's a really fun discussion to have. And I think you could make the argument that maybe there was a point where the top 5 quarterbacks in the league, in the Marino, Elway, Kelly, Warren, Moon era, where maybe the top was just as good or maybe even a little better than it is right now. But to me, what makes it stand out, Peter, and I think you were hinting at this, the overall. So let's go from 5 to 15. I think those quarterbacks right now, that's the reason that this list is better than it's ever been. Not because the person you have at 3, Dak Prescott, is any better than the person you would have had at 3 in 1990, whether that would have been Aikman, Elway, or whoever. He's probably not. But 5 through 15, the middle part of the quarterbacks in the league, any one of those guys could pop up into the top 10 and you'd say, yeah, their production, their winning deserves to be in that part of the list right now. So it's that middle portion, the strength of the efficiency and how well those guys are playing right now. I do think it's better than any time I can remember watching the league.
Yeah, I mean, if you went back 25 years and said 1996, how does that compare? I think what you were saying would be absolutely unequivocally right, because 1996, you would have had Marino, Elway, Favre. You wouldn't have Peyton Manning yet. but you would have a really good kind of top-heavy list. You'd have Bledsoe in there. You'd have a good list, but I just think in terms of depth, if you were to look at the 12th or 13th best quarterback that year, and I don't know who it'd be, but I can tell you this: he wouldn't have the shine of like a Joe Burrow, at least in my opinion. Look, I want to get into 5 other topics really quick, Paul, in the remaining time that we have. And so let's exchange 2 or 3 sentences each on each one of these topics. Number 1, I love Dallas. And I'll just say this. Everybody's always known that this year's Cowboys, if Prescott comes back healthy, are going to be huge and great on offense. We didn't know that they were going to have 3 certifiable stars right now after 6 weeks on defense. Nobody saw this coming with Randy Gregory. Nobody saw this coming with Trevon Diggs. And nobody could see it coming with Micah Parsons because he's a rookie. I love them because of what they can do on defense. We know what they can do on offense.
I'll throw in one more star on offense. It's becoming more and more clear each week, Peter, because he's starting to get a lot of time on all of these broadcasts. And that's offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. I got to know him 10 years ago when NBC had the Mountain West package. I probably did 5 or 6 games up at Boise that year. I don't think today is the time to get into all the minutia and layers of what I think about Kellen and what he did then and what he's adding now. But I have a strong connection to his history in playing the position and calling plays and watching it play out these last 10 years. In one of these podcasts, it would be fun to carve out a little time and talk about some of the history that at the time, I don't know in those meetings or watching them beat up on Air Force that it's going to connect to a big part of the NFL 10 years later. But it would be fun to talk about Kellen a little more sometime down the road.
Will do. Topic 2, the game of the week in week 7. Is there a soul on planet Earth who a month ago would have said that the best game in week 7 was 4-2 Cincinnati at 5-1 Baltimore? I don't know of one, but it just shows you what the league thought of this game. It is a regional telecast at 1 o'clock on Sunday that will be seen by approximately 12% of the United States. That is what everybody thought of the game of the week this week. But look, I love the fact that, hey, Joe Burrow is going to go in there and say, hey, show me anything you got. We'll be fine. I can take a hit. I know you're going to hit me, and we are going to make this a game. What do you think of this one, Paul?
I think I can't wait to watch 2 of the biggest stars in the NFL, 2 of the biggest young stars now on a stage where it's a super meaningful divisional game. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. And it's pretty early in the whole Jamar Chase thing, but Joe Burrow has shown a lot of promise when healthy the last year plus. And now he's going to Baltimore. It's a game for the top of the division. And I can't wait to see if this 12th ranked quarterback, and I agree, he probably is about that point right now, if he plays like a top 10 or a top 8 quarterback. He's gotten our interest the last year plus. Even though 12% will only watch it live, I think a number of us will make sure we go back and watch it that night or maybe the next morning to see how the Burrow Chase, 2 huge stars in the NFL, play on easily their biggest stage yet.
Number 3, Tua worries me a little bit. I understand that it's early in his second year and he's been plagued by injury. I get it. Boy, I watched a lot of that game on Sunday morning rather. He had one really poor throw, one poor interception. I don't know, Paul. What I like, I don't see. He seems to labor to throw. But give me your thoughts on Tua right now as a quarterback watching another quarterback.
I think he's decent. I don't think he's been a failure. I don't think he's been a huge disappointment. But the reaction to and the reality of how he's played is directly connected to what we talked about a few minutes ago that list of top quarterbacks, whether it's top 10, top 12, or top 15, in the middle there, it's fantastic. So you take a young quarterback who's, if you want to look at the glasses half full, he's been fine, but he's nowhere near a top half quarterback in the NFL. So I think the fact that he has been okay instead of great, and the reality that the quarterbacks ahead of him, even the ones younger, are playing really, really well. You have to take that into consideration. So should they have made that pick that early? Probably not, when you look at how the other young quarterbacks are playing and the fact that he's probably somewhere between 20 and 30 in the NFL. And when your defense is as bad as Miami's is right now, it's just not nearly good enough to get it done.
What's always going to hurt him, and it's just like, and again, and I do not mean he's not Ryan Leaf. I do not mean to compare him to Ryan Leaf at all. But what is always going to hurt him, when you're picked back-to-back with a guy at another position, you're always going to be compared to that guy. And just like Ryan Leaf was always compared to Peyton Manning, Tua Tagovailoa will always be compared to Justin Herbert. He just will. Yeah. And right now, the comparison will not be pretty. Next topic. So I sent this to you when we were talking about things we'd talk about on the podcast, and I'm sure you have no idea what I'm talking about. But I said the Raiders are clamming up, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, and I'll explain this to you. So the Raiders, huge story right now, obviously. No more John Gruden as head coach. They name a guy who's been a coach in the NFL, or in the NFL and in college football for a total of 38 years, and has never one time been a head coach in a game until Sunday in Denver. That was Rich Bisaccia. Quite honestly, I would have led my column with Rich Bisaccia on Monday. And I called the Raiders and I said, Will Kiss, who's their PR guy, and I said to him, hey, I really want to get Rich. Could you get me Rich after the game? Because that's kind of how I work. Sunday I got Dak Prescott. I got Spencer Whipple, the unknown play caller for the 6-0 Cardinals. And I call after games and try to talk to people who are going to be newsmakers when people wake up Monday morning. What are the great stories of Sunday? And I could not get Rich Bisaccia. And I'm saying to myself, I can't get Rich Bisaccia. So Will Kiss, who felt bad, basically texted later and he said, hey, listen, Rich, very polite about it, but he wants it to be all about the team now. He doesn't want to do any of this individual stuff saying, hey, look at me. I'm paraphrasing there. What Will just said, I couldn't get him to do it. But I really think the Raiders are a very interesting team now because they went to Denver, and that was pretty much a no-doubt win against a team in the division that's not terrible. They're not good, but that's not a bad team. And it just showed to me that the Raiders are going to be fighting this year.
And they come up on a 3-week stretch, Peter, that I think is really, really good for them. At some point here, there has to be some separation in the AFC West. And the Raiders have the Eagles, they have a bye week, and they have the Giants. So as we push toward November, and once we get to November, the Raiders at 4-2 right now, to call those winnable games, I think, is underselling it. Those are two games they should win against the Eagles and the Giants, sandwiched with a bye there in between. So it's very likely that we get to November with the Raiders, and this mega ugly story is going to get a little further in the rearview mirror, and they have an excellent chance to have, 5-3 maybe, but they ought to be looking at 6-2 as we hit the second half of the season. So I think just football-wise, things look awfully good for Las Vegas.
All right, we're going to end on a positive note. We're each going to pick our most negative team in football, our most disappointing team in football over the first 6 weeks. I will start. It's my pod. I will start, and I will say that my most disappointing team is the Cleveland Browns. And there's a lot of teams that are worse than the Cleveland Browns right now, obviously. But I'll tell you the thing that really kind of disappoints me about the Cleveland Browns, and that is this was a team that was built to be deep, okay? This was a team that was supposed to have depth from top to bottom. And when I look at this team right now, and I look at especially how I thought their defense was going to be a shining star. Now, they've had injuries. There's no doubt about it. But for this defense right now to be averaging, I think they're giving up 25, 26 points a game. And they have not been sort of the crushing defense that everybody thought they would be. I'm totally disappointed in what I've seen of the Browns, especially in a game that they were really hit hard by injuries, that they lose at home to Arizona by 23. That's just an unacceptable result at this point in their development for the Cleveland Browns.
Hey, Peter, as long as we're talking about teams getting thumped well into double digits and underwhelming at this point of the season, my pick is going to be the New York Giants. I'm glad I'm in the quiet of the upstairs of my house here, because I said this at NBC. You know how it is this part of the country. There are a lot of people very attached, really emotional about the Giants. But backing up to before the season, I mean, I don't have any feeling about the Giants any more than I have about the Broncos or the Texans or the Seahawks. They're just a team that I follow and want to know about. And I think it's very realistic at that point, a few weeks ago, to think, hey, the Giants' continuity on the coaching staff brought in some really nice talent. Saquon's healthy. Daniel Jones getting more experience. They should be a competitive 3-3 at this point of the season. I don't think they should have been 5-1 or even 4-2, but a progressing competitive team, very realistic.
Right.
And for them to be 1-5 coming off of that performance they had over the weekend against the Rams, unacceptable, certainly counts. And I think underwhelming fits when the way I look at them.
You know, if we had a draft of the most disappointing teams, you know, the next pick on my board would be Miami. I'm shocked at Miami. But anyway, Paul, listen, thanks so much for taking the time this week. We'll be back again next week as we take a whip around in the NFL. But now I'm going to get to Seth Wickersham, who's written a book, It's Better to Be Feared, about the long dynasty of the New England Patriots. We got into quite a lot. I think you're going to enjoy our discussion.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.